Elias Reyes wasn't a man of many words, but the few he spoke always carried the weight of honesty. He lived with his 8-year-old daughter, Lena, in a weathered one-bedroom house on the far edge of a fading industrial town. Life had been stripped of extravagance, but within the modest home thrived a gentle rhythm, one held together by discipline, small joys, and the unwavering bond between a father and his only child. They didn't have much, but they had enough. Elias worked 6 days a week at the packaging plant that sat like a steel skeleton near the railway. He walked the floor from dawn to dusk, sealing boxes, loading pallets, and wiping sweat off his brow while thinking only of Lena. Always Lena. His wife, Sophia, had passed away 5 years earlier after an infection turned septic within days. Elias had no time to grieve properly. He buried his sorrow in long hours and tighter hugs. Every morning, he'd braid Lena's hair with the clumsy fingers of a man never taught to braid, yet his touch was always gentle. He would tie the loops unevenly and joke that he was inventing a new style called wind knots. She'd giggle, and that sound was what kept him alive. Her laughter was brighter than the worn sun filtering through their stained curtains. They had their traditions: hot porridge with sliced bananas on Sundays, trips to the park to count ducks on Saturdays, and bedtime stories every single night without fail. Elias read slowly, often stumbling on long words, but Lena never corrected him. She just listened with eyes wide and heart open. He kept a jar of coins on the kitchen shelf labeled "Someday," which Lena believed was for a trip to the sea. She didn't know that Elias sometimes dipped into it for bread or medicine. The crash came without warning. One morning, as workers lined up at the factory gate, a laminated sign greeted them: "Permanently closed due to bankruptcy." Elias stood in stunned silence, lunchbox in hand, as murmurs turned to shouts. A manager in a hard hat handed out severance forms that offered barely 2 weeks of pay. Elias took his and nodded. There was no protest, no angry speech, only resignation, like watching a tide pull away the land beneath your feet. He walked home slowly, unsure of what to say to Lena. When she asked him why he was home early, he simply said, "The factory's taking a nap." That night, he skipped dinner, blaming his stomachache. It was the beginning of many such lies. Weeks turned into months. Elias hunted for work with increasing desperation, sweeping storefronts, offering to do yard work, handing out a dozen resumes at local groceries and gas stations. Nothing stuck. Even the temp agencies were silent. Bills piled up like storm clouds. First, the water was shut off for 2 days. Then the electricity flickered and died. The landlord, kind but not wealthy himself, offered an extra week. Then, one morning, a notice was nailed to their door. Eviction. They had 6 days. Elias gathered what little they had: a few clothes, Lena's books, a flashlight, and a fraying blanket from Sophia's side of the bed. He led Lena away in the middle of the night so no one would see them leave. They walked 2 miles to an old rail shack he'd found months ago while searching for scrap metal. It was abandoned, tucked between rusting tracks and overgrown weeds. The roof leaked and rats visited nightly, but it was shelter. Elias called it their fort, pretending it was a secret base only the bravest explorers could survive in. Lena played along, but her eyes said otherwise. Food became the most painful battle. Elias survived on stale crackers, expired canned beans, and the odd apple he could trade from a street vendor in exchange for sweeping a stall. He once traded his wedding ring for a bag of rice. He told Lena bedtime stories even as his stomach twisted. He learned to smile through hunger. Lena stopped growing. Her cheeks thinned, her voice grew quieter. At school, she became the girl with tired eyes and torn sleeves. Teachers noticed, but said little. Poverty is often invisible when it wears silence as a coat. One day, Elias stood in line for the town's free meal program, only to be turned away after hours of waiting. They'd run out. He returned empty-handed, defeated, finding Lena curled beneath the blanket, her lips pale and her body shivering despite the extra layers he'd wrapped around her. "It's okay, Papa," she whispered. "I'm not even that hungry." She lied better than he did. The next morning, Elias left again to search for work, refusing to give up. Before leaving, he removed his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Stay warm, princessa," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be back with food." But hunger is a cruel master, and Lena, desperate for something, anything, wandered toward the old farm nearby. She remembered watching the cows there in better days, tossing them grass over the fence and giggling when they mooed. The cold wind stung her cheeks, and her knees ached, but she kept walking. She saw a large metal bin near the barn, full of coarse yellowish pellets, animal feed, meant for pigs and chickens. It smelled strange, but not awful. Her stomach ached. She reached in, trembling, and shoved a handful in her mouth. A shout rang out. A farmhand had seen her. Startled, Lena backed away, coughing as dust coated her throat. The man yelled, snapping a photo on his phone. "Get out of here! You filthy little thief!" he barked. Lena stumbled back, humiliated, the shame burning more than her hunger. That photo, of a small girl in a grown man's coat, eating from a livestock bin, began circulating within hours. It was posted online with captions meant to be funny. "When you're so broke you eat pig food," one read. "Apocalypse girl spotted," said another. The image caught the attention of locals, but not the kind that helps. People whispered. Some laughed. Others clucked their tongues in judgment. Lena ran back to the shack, crying harder than she had in months. Elias found her there hours later, huddled in a corner with streaks of dirt on her face and fear in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Papa," she sobbed. "I was just so hungry." Elias didn't speak. He sat beside her slowly, wrapped her in his arms, and listened to the shaking rhythm of her breath. When she quieted, he took off his coat again, though the cold was biting now, and wrapped it around her tightly. Then he whispered, "You eat first, daughter. Always." His voice didn't tremble, but something broke inside him in that moment, something that could not be repaired with warmth or time. The next morning, Elias did something he never imagined himself doing. He found a flattened cardboard box, tore it clean, and scrawled a message on it with a piece of charwood. In large, crooked letters it read, "I failed her. I need work. Please help." He walked into town, holding the sign against his chest. Some people glanced at him with pity. Others turned away. A few took photos, not knowing this was the same man whose daughter had become the subject of their cruel jokes. Hours passed. His arms ached. His stomach gnawed. But he stood still, like a monument to despair, refusing to leave. He didn't beg. He didn't shout. He just stood there, holding that sign like a father shielding his child from the world. Then one man stopped. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at Elias, then at the sign, then at Elias again. Finally, he asked quietly, "Is it true?" Elias nodded. The man looked at his own reflection in a nearby shop window, at his coat, his gloves, his shopping bags, and something in his expression changed. "Come with me," he said. And just like that, the story began to turn. The man who stopped was named Marcus Daly, a mid-level manager at the local hardware store. Not wealthy, not influential, but decent, and more importantly, a father himself. He led Elias silently across Main Street into the back entrance of the store, where the cold gave way to warmth and the hum of fluorescent lights. Without ceremony, he handed Elias a pair of gloves and told him to start by sweeping the back lot. "It's not much," he said, "but it's something." And something, in Elias's world, was everything. For the first time in weeks, Elias used his hands for work that gave back. He swept and stacked loaded bags of mulch, carried out orders with aching arms and silent gratitude. Marcus didn't ask many questions, but he gave Elias a lunch voucher, and when Elias tried to refuse, Marcus looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You take that and eat. Dignity doesn't live on an empty stomach." Back at the rail shack that night, Elias brought Lena a warm sandwich still wrapped in its foil, the cheese soft from heat, and the bread fresh with a scent that made her eyes widen in disbelief. They ate side by side, not saying much, because words couldn't carry the weight of what they felt. The next morning, Elias returned to the store, and this time Marcus introduced him to the rest of the staff. "This is Elias," he said simply. "He's one of us now." For days, Elias worked quietly, head down, grateful. But the town had not forgotten the photo, nor had the internet. The image continued to spread, attracting attention from outside the sleepy borders of the town. A blogger picked it up, then a regional news site. Then, without warning, a nationally syndicated morning show aired a blurred version of Lena's face under the headline, "America's Hidden Hunger." Suddenly, everything shifted. A local reporter knocked on Marcus's office door, asking for a statement. Marcus, annoyed, declined. "She's a child," he said. Not a headline, but the story had already taken root. Community members, many of whom had either scrolled past the image in silence or laughed uncomfortably, began seeing it differently now. When they saw Elias stacking lumber in the store yard or walking home with his daughter, they didn't see failure anymore. They saw sacrifice. They saw someone who hadn't asked for help until shame forced it. A group of local mothers formed a quiet alliance and dropped off clothes and toiletries anonymously at the store. Someone left an envelope with $87 inside a box of work gloves. Another woman sent a new children's coat to the store's front desk with a tag that read, "To the brave little explorer." Elias was overwhelmed but wary. He never wanted pity, only work. Yet Lena's smile returned the day she tried on her new coat, twirling like a child unburdened by hunger. Meanwhile, the local pastor invited Elias to speak at the community center, promising it would be brief and gentle. Elias declined, but Lena whispered, "Maybe they need to hear it, Papa." So he went. The gathering was small, maybe 40 people, but each face carried shame not from judgment, but from reflection. When Elias spoke, his voice was low and slow, deliberate like someone weighing each word with care. "I never asked for help because I didn't want my daughter to know we were drowning," he said. "But she already knew. And I was wrong. Pride doesn't feed a child. Community does." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Someone wept. Someone else stood and hugged him. After that night, offers trickled in, not just for charity, but for real help. A retired carpenter offered to help Elias fix up the rail shack, turning it into something livable. A retired teacher brought Lena storybooks and promised weekly tutoring. The manager of a diner offered Elias a side gig cleaning up before opening. Word reached the mayor's office. A town hall was scheduled under the pretext of rural poverty and emergency assistance, but everyone knew whose story sparked it. And then, one morning, Elias found himself being interviewed live on that same national morning show, this time willingly, with Lena seated beside him, her small hand wrapped around his. He wore the coat someone had donated, and she wore the boots that another had left outside the shack with a bow. The host asked gently, "What message would you give to other parents in your situation?" Elias thought for a long time before answering. "Don't wait until they catch your child eating animal feed," he said, voice steady. "Let your community see you before your shame hides you." That line, that one raw, devastating line went viral. It was replayed, quoted, printed on posters, and shared in schools, churches, forums. Donations followed, first small, then flooding in from places as far as Oregon, Maine, and even overseas. A crowdfunding page, started by someone Elias didn't even know, reached $20,000 in 4 days. Elias was stunned. He didn't know what to do with the money, but Marcus advised him to put it in a trust for Lena. "You earned it," he said, through truth. And yet, despite all this, Elias refused to leave the hardware store job. "My hands still work," he told Marcus. "Let them." He used the funds not to buy luxury, but to build dignity. The shack became a cottage, insulated, warm, with a real stove and a reading nook for Lena. The town, changed by the story, created a mutual aid pantry funded by local shops and restaurants. Kids who once snickered at Lena now sat beside her in class, asking if she could share her lunch stories. The teacher, once silent, apologized and invited Elias to speak to the faculty. He did, carefully, truthfully. "You don't have to solve everything," he told them, "but look closer. Sometimes hunger hides behind good manners." Even the farmhand who'd taken the original photo came forward, ashamed, and asked for forgiveness. Elias looked him in the eye and said, "If it made you see clearer, then we're even." Lena's world changed too. She began drawing again. Pictures of castles made from wood and tin, of fathers with signs and daughters wrapped in big coats. She gave one drawing to Elias. It showed a man holding up a broken umbrella against the rain while his daughter stayed dry beneath it. "That's you," she said simply. At night, when the world was still, Elias sometimes sat outside the now-warm cottage and stared at the stars. He thought of Sophia, wondered if she was watching, if she saw their daughter's eyes full of light again. He didn't cry often, but when he did, he cried with gratitude. The town had once turned its back, but when they finally saw him, truly saw him, they turned around. Not all stories find redemption. But sometimes, when one man dares to hold up his shame in the cold light of day, it becomes a mirror the whole town must face. And in that mirror, if they're brave, they don't just see poverty, they see responsibility. Elias followed the man without question, the cardboard sign still pressed to his chest, as they crossed the cobbled square beneath a leaden sky. His legs ached, his fingers were stiff from the cold, but something in the stranger's voice had cracked through the silence that had wrapped itself around him for weeks. The man, whose name was Arturo, led him into a narrow brick building 2 blocks from the center, a community kitchen attached to a small church. Warmth hit Elias's face like a gentle slap as he stepped inside. The scent of stew and fresh bread made his stomach twist violently with hunger. Arturo didn't ask questions at first. He simply handed Elias a bowl, motioned to a bench, and said, "Eat." Elias hesitated. The last time someone had seen his daughter hungry, they had laughed. He didn't want pity. He wanted work. But Arturo only repeated, gently but firmly, "Eat. Then we talk." After finishing the food in slow, disbelieving spoonfuls, Elias finally began to speak. He told Arturo everything. The factory, the eviction, the shack, Lena's shrinking frame, the animal feed, the coat. Every word spilled out like a confession, his eyes never rising from the floor. Arturo listened without interrupting, his arms folded, his face unreadable. When Elias finally paused, exhausted, expecting judgment, he instead heard, "She doesn't need to eat feed again." Now while I got breath. Arturo made a few phone calls that afternoon. A cot was prepared in a nearby shelter. Lena was brought in gently from the shack that night, still wrapped in Elias's coat, blinking at the sudden lights and warmth. Nurses examined her. Volunteers gave her clean clothes. Someone handed her a stuffed lion. She clutched it like it was made of gold. Elias cried that night, not because of shame, but because of gratitude so large it hollowed him out. The next morning, Arturo returned with something unexpected, a job. Not a glamorous one, but work at the community kitchen, helping to clean, organize donations, and prepare meals. Elias didn't hesitate. He took the apron in both hands, as if it were a medal, and began scrubbing pots with the zeal of a man building his life from the ashes. News of what had happened, the full story, not just a photo, began to spread. A young journalism student, moved by the Post and Elias's silent protest in the town square, wrote a piece titled, "The Man Who Said, 'You Eat First, Daughter.'" It was shared thousands of times. With it came messages, donations, and visits. Not all pure in motive, but many were. Some neighbors came with blankets. One woman donated an old space heater. The schoolteacher who had once looked past Lena's pale face came by with books and whispered apologies. An old man brought socks. "Dry feet matter," he said, and left before Elias could thank him. But Elias didn't accept help without giving something back. He insisted on mending the shelter's broken window, offered to paint walls, and shoveled snow from the sidewalks without being asked. "If I can stand, I can serve," he told Arturo one morning. It became his quiet motto. Lena, now safely sleeping in a warm bed each night, began to return to herself. She laughed again, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. Her cheeks filled out. She began helping in the kitchen after school, arranging spoons, wiping counters, learning recipes from a kindly cook named Noreen. She stopped flinching when people raised their voices. One day, someone showed her the viral photo again, and she didn't cry. She just looked at it, then at her father, and said, "That's not who I am anymore." The town changed, too. People remembered. They remembered that hunger wasn't always far away, and that sometimes it wore the face of a child. The mocking voices quieted. New signs appear near the square. Food for all. Dignity first. We remember Lena. A group of high school students started a winter food drive and named it Coats and Crumbs. Volunteers quadrupled. A local farmer who once dismissed the incident built a community greenhouse, inviting Elias and Lena to grow herbs there with him. "Let's plant something good," he said. By spring, Elias had moved into a small apartment near the shelter. It wasn't fancy, peeling wallpaper, uneven floors, but it was theirs. He bought a secondhand chair and placed it beside the window where sunlight spilled in during afternoons. Lena painted stars on the wall near her bed. She still kept the stuffed lion, though its seams had loosened. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, the town held a quiet gathering in the square. Not to celebrate, but to acknowledge. Arturo spoke. So did Lena's teacher. Finally, Elias stepped forward. He didn't use notes. He didn't speak long. "I didn't ask for charity," he said. "I asked for a chance to work so she wouldn't have to starve. And you gave us more than that. You gave us back our place in the world. So thank you. But don't forget. Don't look away next time. Look closer." After the applause died down, Lena climbed onto the bench where he had once stood with the cardboard sign and whispered something to him. He nodded. She turned to the crowd and said, "No one should ever have to eat what animals eat. Not when we can share." Her voice was steady, her back straight. She had grown. That night, as they sat at their own table eating soup with thick slices of bread, real bread, Elias looked across at Lena and smiled. He wasn't ashamed anymore. He was proud. Proud of her strength, proud of his scars, proud of the path they had walked. He reached for his coat on the hook by the door and laid it gently across her shoulders, even though the heater was humming. She looked at him, puzzled. "Papa, I'm not cold." "I know," he said, "but it's still yours first."